Hi everyone, welcome back to the CH Wine Tasting Room. It's Chris Lafleur, your super sommelier from Toronto, and I'm here with Joe Roberts, the man, the myth, the legend behind onewinedude.com. You've got questions, we've got answers. We're gonna demystify the world of wine for you in just a couple of questions as we go through. Hit us with your best shot.
Okay, so go-to wines for midweek, celebrating the fact that you were able to wake up and finish work that day, right?
Yeah, you made your bed that day.
Yeah, I celebrate the small victories with wine.
Yeah.
How about you, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes those small victories are, I was able to get out of bed and get my kid to school and back or whatever. Personally, I like a lot of these unsung areas or simpler areas, I guess you'd say, with wines. On a Wednesday, I love thinking about wine, but I don't want to think about it too much. Sometimes I want to just enjoy it. And I'm a big fan of Beaujolais for that reason. Okay, I love pulling just like a simple Beaujolais off the shelf when I have them. Unfortunately, I don't have any right now because I've done too many of those Wednesday night Beaujolais, But that's one for me. That's a pretty go-to, versatile, easy to goes with a ton of different foods, high acidity, and a lot of times don't have to think too much about just enjoying it. How about you, man?
Me? Oh man, I know what I'm drinking. If I had a real good payday, I'm drinking Puligny Montrachet. I like Burgundy. I like white Burgundy. It's to me the highest form of Chardonnay and how it exists. So that's what I'm drinking. If I can't afford that, I'm probably thinking about Etna, and I'm thinking like Etna Bianco. So I'm thinking about Caricante.
Love
beautiful
Caricante.
wine. It's Chardonnay without being Chardonnay. It's delicious. It's very mineral and driven by nuancing character and like flintiness. It's wonderful.
And not unlike Cru Beaujolais that I picked, some of them, those Caricantes, age way longer than you might expect.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you've got a Cru Beauj, so we say Cru Beauj, or a Caricante, right? If you've got either of those kind of hanging out, you may have forgotten that you have them. Still open it, still try them because a lot of times they're still giving you pleasure way longer than you might have expected.
It's nice to forget a really nice wine in the back of your cellar. And like, oh yeah, all right.
It's like finding $10 in your couch cushion.
Yeah,
right on.
I've been waiting for an occasion. Well, it's Wednesday. Let's do it. All right, so this is a tricky one to work around, but the question is, my friend claims they get headaches from sulfites. Are they true? Is it true? Is it a myth? Is it a legend? Well, there's not a lot of deep study on this topic. We're still kind of just starting to understand it. But what I can say is that when someone says they're allergic to sulfites, there doesn't appear to be an anaphylactic reaction to sulfites. And if there was, the place that you would find it would be unlikely to be in wine, especially red wine, because there's more sulfites in white wine and there's more sulfites in dried fruit. There is some new information that's recently come out about quercetin. So quercetin is a flavanol that lives in the skin of dark grapes. What happens is it prevents the breakdown of acetaldehyde, which alcohol becomes acetaldehyde, becomes acetic acid, to work its way out of your system. So if it prevents that breakdown, you have acetaldehyde, a carcinogen, in your system for that much longer, which often causes face flushing and redness. So what people seem to be saying about sulfites might actually be attributable to this, and then darker skinned wines or darker skinned grapes that make darker wines will have more of this character that prevents the breakdown.
Now this is an awesome explanation. Huzzah! To your point, my understanding, I am not a doctor or a medical professional, but my understanding is sulfite allergies, this is a serious thing, okay? I mean, and if you're able to eat a dried apricot and not get rushed to the hospital, you probably aren't actually allergic, technically, to sulfites. Now, is it causing the headache? I mean, I'm gonna go with what's the most statistically likely reason that you've got a headache after drinking, especially red wines. Right? Red wines tend to be, on average, higher in alcohol than whites. And my guess is, if you've got a headache after you had that nice red wine, you really liked it, you drank a lot of it, and you didn't have enough water, and now you got a hangover. And a hangover, yeah, that causes headaches.
Yeah.
Right? So, hey, no judging. We've all been there. We've all been there, okay? Especially us in the business.
Yesterday.
Right. So probably, my view on this as a non-medical professional, probably not. Enjoy your wine, drink a bunch more water, and see how that goes first.
Yeah. And then I would also say, if you do really think it is sulfites, you should consult a doctor or an allergist.
Yes, totally.
And don't read an article and say, oh, I've got that too. Check your doctor first.
Wine storage, the classic question, where do I put my bottles? And I know my joke is most wine only gets stored and aged in the back seat of the car on the way back from the wine shop, right? And then people get home and open it. So wine doesn't like, it's like a food. And there's things it doesn't like in terms of helping it stay stable. It doesn't like heat. It doesn't like light. It doesn't like vibration. So if you want to make sure you have the best chance of ruining your wine, stick it on top of those little wine racks that are built in above the refrigerators, because you get all three of those things in one spot. It's like the absolute worst little place to stick your wine. Now, generally, if you've got a bunch of bottles you're going to drink right away, it almost doesn't matter kind of where you're putting them. As long as it's not too hot, you're probably okay. But anything that you want to lay down for even a little bit of time, don't stick it up there. That's the worst place. So on to where, if we want to age something for a long time, where are we putting it?
Well, you also hit it on the nose of you want to lay it down. That's pretty key. A lot of people will store their wine standing up, but if wine's not lying down, the cork is gradually getting drier and drier because it doesn't have any fluid to contact it. So if you keep it on its side, then we're always keeping that cork wet and moist, and then it doesn't shrink and allow oxygen in. So,
which is the other thing wine doesn't like too much of too early. Right?
They are not friends. Well, always, generally. We'll see. Well, that's a deeper conversation. So for me, I'm storing it in a dark place. I'm storing it on its side, usually with lots of other bottles, and I'm trying to keep it generally cool. But if I can't keep it completely cool, if it's not in an actual temperature-controlled wine fridge, I'm at least keeping it stable in temperature. It's not going up, it's not going down dramatically. That's also as bad for wine as storing it at the wrong temperature generally.
So if you don't have a cellar, I have a cellar, but if you don't have one, you had mentioned storage controlled.
Yeah.
Those are really good options. And
Great.
The one thing I would recommend is, two things actually. One is you're going to want to get one that's slightly bigger than you think you need, because you'll fill it. When you start getting the wine bug and collect, you'll fill it, okay? The other is look for one that's specifically designed for wine. And because to your point about not having big temperature fluctuations, they tend to only do sort of these micro increments very slowly, which helps keep a more stable temperature over time. They'll also have some humidity control, which is another thing that you do want to have some humidity. You don't want that cork to dry out. And so those that are specifically made for that purpose, they'll tend to tick all those boxes rather than just sort of a food fridge or sort of an adjunct type fridge from a brand that doesn't specialize in wine fridges. So I would recommend going with one that's specifically designed for the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And then other places you can keep it in the house, if you don't have a fridge, but you still want to keep it dark, closets are pretty good. If the closet is not somewhere that it's going to get really warm, there's not a lot of pipes in the walls heating everything up, and you're not slowly cooking your wine, also not a bad spot. It's dark, it's lying down, it's separated from all the shenanigans of the daily household. Good spot.
Skeletons out, wine's in.
That's good. Yes, 100%. A femur is approximately the same size. Actually, I don't know if that's true. Don't know if that's true. All right, so the next question is, how do you know where a wine's sweet spot is in terms of when is the best time to open it? Now, that's a deceptively tricky question. With Cameron Hughes wines, one of the things that I think we do well here is that in all these videos that we do, we tell you when we think this is going to be showing its best. Because I know that that's an anxiety that people have when they're taking wine, especially to keep, that am I drinking this? Is it too young? I don't know if I'm enjoying it that much. Is it my fault because I opened it too early or something? Or did I open it too late? And all those things are possible, but what you've got to understand is that your palate is not the same as mine. It's not the same as Joe's. It's not the same as the super producers behind the camera right now. So you have to you trust a little bit that you know what you like. And if you know you like a wine that's a little bit older, or if you like it right out of the bottle, like as soon as you get your hands on it, those are both okay. Now, if you're looking for the right answer, there isn't really one, but there is maybe a best answer. And if you can't find it from us on our videos, there are some resources online where you can look to see where a particular region's vintage is saying it should be opened at. Do you have any recommendations on sites to look at, Joe?
Well, I mean, I think you can actually search vintage charts, and typically they'll have a recommendation. Plenty of wine guides have recommendations too. The U Johnson Pocket Wine Guide is a great one for something like that. And great resource if you don't have it already. It's traditionally been one of the best ones out there. Your point about trusting your own palate is the ultimate arbiter. I mean, that is the way to go. Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that there's a handful of wine styles that take the guesswork out for you. There's some fortified wines like Madeira that are ready to go. There's some still wines. Rioja is one that ages the wine for you. You may like it aged in the bottle a bit more, but generally speaking, they release it when they expect it's ready to go. But
there's also some wine styles that like indicate like, hey, drink this now, like Beaujolais Nouveau.
Yeah,
it's new, it's ready to go.
I have a general rule of thumb that might be helpful, which is, and it sounds simplistic, but the more you pay for a wine, generally speaking, the longer you should be able to age it, or you should have an expectation that it will be able to age gracefully for a longer period of time. Now, that doesn't mean a $100 bottle versus a $30 bottle means, I can age the $100 bottle 3 times as long. Okay, it's not a mathematical formulation, but generally, if you're paying for a better product, right? And it's a more expensive one that's theoretically made from superior quality grapes and has better resources behind it being made, et cetera, et cetera. And those are generally made to last a bit longer than less expensive wines. So it's just a rough thumb in the air thing there. Again, don't get out the calculator for that one. It won't tell you exactly how long to age it.
There's no algorithm for this one.
But you should expect that if you spent a couple $100 on a beautiful Cabernet, right? Well, from an esteemed producer, you should expect that one can go longer than a $10 Cabernet, right? That's meant for everyday drinking.
Yeah. There's great wine guides online, like I think Wine Spectator has some, Wine Enthusiast, Decanter, that if you look for like a vintage report, it'll tell you if this particular wine is ready to drink now or to hold.
And again, they're making their own guesstimate. Right?
They're making their own guesstimate, and it's again based on someone else's palate. But these are good things to follow. And it's like I say about reviewers, like forget about the score most of the time, but if they are in line with your tastes, then maybe that's a good person to follow.
Yeah, great point. And I tend to think a little visually.
Yeah.
And I think of wine as kind of, as it develops in the bottle, as like a graph. And usually you start out, there's a bunch of fruit. And over time, that fruit's gonna diminish. And you've got other secondary and tertiary kind of things going on. And over time, they're gonna go up. And I tend to like a wine, especially reds, even whites for me, where those two lines are almost about to hit. The fruit is not quite below the tertiary, but they're getting a little closer. But hey, a lot of people like this.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, palates, especially in traditional wine drinking areas in Western Europe, they like this, culturally. So your point, you know what you like first. But I think for those who think visually, if you kind of think of it like that and you experiment, it's a great lesson to be learned in terms of you buy multiple bottles, right? Because you can then start to sample them over time and get a sense of where on those curves you like your wine, or you go, I like my Cabernet kind of here. Okay, well then after you've experimented with a few bottles, and that helps your future buying decisions.
Yeah.
Me, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of alternative packaging. Anything that shakes up the norm in wine, because wine is a very traditional business, and we need it. Thank you for that, by the way.
No problem.
We need to give it a kick in the butt, once in a while. Also, we tend to be okay with things in wine that we wouldn't be okay with in other consumables. So, for example, we've got this one isn't as much as heavy as a lot out there, which is nice to see. But sometimes you get premium wines in really heavy bottles. Not great for the environment in terms of shipping things around. Glass is recyclable, that's great. Cork's recyclable, that's great. But you're generating a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's also a stressor on the environment.
Even the temperature that you need to make glass strong enough for wine can actually be pretty high, so it takes a lot of energy to make these. So there's pros and cons to everything. Now, with glass bottles, I like that, this bottle will eventually completely degrade into nothing. Whereas now there's the fashion of PET bottles, like plastic bottles, that I'm not sure how I feel about it because they do not break down. And people will say well, hey, they are recyclable, but they're not really because they do degrade and you have to add new plastic in it when you're recycling the bottle. So over time, you're still creating new plastic. I don't know how beneficial it is. I've also never encountered a vessel that has plastic in it, whether it's cork or whether it's a bottle, that doesn't change the taste of the wine in some way.
Ah, interesting.
And there's proof of this too. You have to actually formulate the bottles carefully to make sure that they don't leach chemicals, but they will inevitably because we are dealing with a universal solvent here, water, acid, alcohol, everything here will take everything apart.
Yeah, you want something inert, right? You don't want it interacting. Another thing we put up with, right, is the fact that we need a specialized tool to get at the product.
Now, just to be clear, if we get rid of this, I don't have a job anymore.
That is not true.
So much of my job is opening bottles tableside.
But when you think about that, that would be, we would riot in the streets if milk and orange juice was like that, right? So,
yeah.
And what a lot of these alternative packaging options tend to do is give us an alternative to having a specialized tool, right? And I think especially for earlier consumption wines, that's great. I think, so if we're starting to see a lot of innovation in those areas with, you've got cans, you've got Tetra Paks, you've got kegs. I mean, there's a lot of different options.
Glass enclosures.
Glass enclosures. And I think in general, all those things are great. They push the industry into thinking more about sustainability. They push into thinking more about impacts on the environment, impact on the future. I think all those things are great. Now, will some of those things ever replace the glass bottle and cork for longevity of the finest wines? I don't know. I mean, we've got a lot of data on how a traditional cork and a glass bottle works with aging wine. We've literally got hundreds of years on it, right? We know what these things do. We've got less of a track record on these newer things, but that doesn't mean that they're not also viable. Screw caps, if screw caps are good enough for some of the greatest red wines produced in Australia, and the entire southern hemisphere, they're good enough for for anything else. And so I think we're on the cusp of understanding now that fine wines can age very well in those closures.
Yeah.
The different types of packaging, probably not enough data yet, but we're getting there. So I think, to me, it's an exciting future.
We also have a lot more data about how the traditional cork doesn't do what we thought it did. We used to think that oxygen passed through this cork and made its way into the wine to micro-oxidize it and make it age over time. But that is not true. It's actually residual oxygen within the cork that makes its way in. So once wine has hit a certain level of development and it's used up that oxygen, it kind of doesn't change for a very long time until the cork breaks down enough to let even more oxygen in. So it kind of changes, stays the same, changes again. So we know so much about this. And we also know that, well, if in fact the wine does pretty well, once it gets to a point where it doesn't change using oxygen, well, then the screw cap should be fine to do the same thing.
Yeah.
I think universally people recognize that some sommeliers can be pretty obnoxious, myself included. After all, I am trying to sell you a bottle of wine. But one of the things that we do that looks remarkably pretentious, and a lot of wine people do, is slurping their wine. Would you give us an example?
Absolutely.
So you can see here, he's taking a sip of the glass, and now instead of swallowing it, he's making funny noises with his mouth. But what we're actually doing here is we're trying to bring more oxygen to this wine and inhale retronasally. Retronasal? What the heck is that? So when we smell something like this, This is orthonasal. This is where things come in through the traditional passage and we get it into our olfactory receptors and understand how it smells. But when we taste it and then slurp it, we allow it to go retronasally into our olfactory receptors and we get a different perception of the wine. Maybe one that strengthens our initial one, maybe one that gives us more nuance.
Now, this is a fascinating topic, and it was actually the favorite part of my research and writing for the book I wrote, Wine Taster's Guide. We started on what actually is happening when you're tasting wine in your brain and then in your mouth and your nose. And yeah, you nailed it, right? The bottom line is wine is mostly water. The magic is in all these volatile compounds that wine has. And they're so complex that our brains don't even understand them. So they reach for the closest thing that they can get to. And so that's why some wines, this smells like rhubarb and black currant and cinnamon spice, because that's the closest it feels to your mind and your nose.
And in some cases, it actually is the same chemical, but like it's not coming from the same source. So we do have to parse it out.
And in that case, you're not going to get any of that unless you get it up. And so the younger the wine is, the harder it is to, it's not going to jump out immediately, right? Because the younger it is, the less time it's actually had to interact with oxygen to get those volatile compounds up. So that's why we swirl. We want to get the oxygen in there, get those volatile compounds out. That's why we slurp. Now, you can enjoy your wine without having to do this, right? We do it because we're trying to analyze it in our minds and get everything out of it, and usually it's for professional purposes.
We want to give you the best answer that we can.
Right. Now, you can do it, and it's cool. You'll get a lot more out of it, but you don't have to slurp with every sip of your wine. You can just enjoy it, right? But that's why we do it. It's seems weird and odd and kind of gross sometimes, right?
Yeah, and you can be gross right along with us. Yeah. But I recommend if you don't do this very often, don't do it with a white shirt on your first.
That's a mistake that the wine pro makes usually one time.
Oh yeah.
And then you're wearing dark
it's all black suits from now on.
Yeah. But try it sometime. I mean, preferably on your own. Maybe not in mixed company or at the fine restaurant, steakhouse where everyone's looking around. What's this guy doing? But you'll get a lot more out of your wine, especially younger red wines, younger white wines, when you do that little slurp. At least do it at least a couple times with one of your favorites and see what happens.
No gargling, slurping, very different. One's classy, one's not.
Is there a method behind how we sequence tasting wine, right? And so you often hear, maybe you should have a lighter wine first, white wines first, red wines later. So my experience, and I've done a lot of wine judging, and palate fatigue is a real thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Your palate it's like a muscle. It's like, it's like throwing a javelin or doing some kind of sport in a way.
It's very similar to throwing a javelin.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you're spitting, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm going to act like I'm spitting a javelin now.
Yeah, I speared one of our producers earlier today.
So you can tire it out, is the bottom line. So generally speaking, what are the things that tire your palate out? Alcohol.
Yep.
Right. So the higher the alcohol, the sort of the heavier that will feel on your palate. Tannin is a classic one. So the more tannin you get, and again, you'll of course get more in reds usually than whites. Even acidity, which livens up the palate if you have too much of it too soon. Sugar is another one.
Yep.
All those things will tire you out. Now you're dealing with all of them to some extent every time you taste a wine. So the general rule of thumb that I go by from my experience is it's good to taste higher acid, drier, lighter wines first, move into heavier, and then moving into sweeter. Having said that, having a palate refresher between those types of categories when you're drinking can also be really good. So it's not wrong, say, to be drinking a deep red wine like this Columbia Valley Cabernet that we've got right here, and then saying, I kind of want like a zesty Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah.
And have one of those and perk your palate up and then go back to red. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you've got enough time, space in between to sort of let your palate recover a little bit. Yeah. And again, this comes more into play when you're tasting like hundreds of wines in a day, okay, like I might do for a competition. Less so when you're out at dinner. How do you feel on the Somm side? What do you think of that sort of that tasting regimen.
Yeah, 100% agree. When I'm doing like a blind tasting where I've got like 6 wines, we usually prioritize like we're going to start with the whites, because generally the whites don't have tannin, so we don't have to worry about blowing that section of our palate out. We start with like lower acid and work up to higher. We start with drier and work up to sweeter if we're going to get there, because all these things can really mess things up. And then also, if you're starting really high acid and then you try something that's a little bit lower, it's going to feel like it might not have any acid at all. So then you have to also calibrate that. Well, I just had high acid. I got to make sure that I'm getting something fresh here to determine the acid on this one accurately. So you have to do things like calibrate your palate, you have to put things in the right order, you have to try not to blow out your palate. And then there's also the trick of not blowing out your nose either. Like your olfactory receptors, you can go nose blind to certain things. It's like when, you made a tuna casserole and it's been on the stove all day. And like you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I decided to make a tuna casserole. It stinks up my whole kitchen. And then eventually hour passes, you're watching Netflix and then like, I don't smell that tuna casserole
Then
anymore.
your friend comes over and is like,
what is that tuna casserole? And then suddenly, like that's all you can smell again. So the trick for me for going not nose blind is take my shirt, and whenever I've been smelling wine a lot and I can't pick out anything new, then I'll come back and I'll smell my shirt. Just something a little different to refresh the nose with something else.
I've used coffee beans.
Coffee beans as
They're a
well,
great one,
yeah.
yeah.
And then you come back.
I have a coffee bean shirt actually for this exact purpose.
Made of beans?
Yeah, made of coffee.
Beautiful. It's like a lot of double-sided duct tape with a lot of coffee beans on it. But the beans look like buttons, so you can't really tell.
I don't actually have them.
He does, I've seen it. Oh, delightful. Okay, so the question is, regarding terroirs and AVAs, what is the difference between mountain fruit and valley fruit? This is a great question because there is an answer that's been discovered by a wonderful winemaker in Argentina, Laura Catena. So at the Catena estate, they deal with a lot of Malbec, and some of the best sites that they choose are higher in elevation.
Really high.
Really high.
Thousands of feet.
Yes, it's remarkable. Like you'll get a And sorry, thousands of feet for you, 1,000 meters for me. Canadian, American. Oh my God, how do we get along? But one of the things she figured out is that the grapes that are at higher altitude, because they are contending with a higher UV that much closer to the sun, the grapes produce thicker skins and more color to protect the seed inside from UV light. So wines that are made from mountain fruit generally will become slightly darker in color. They will have a longer ripening because you also lose temperature as you go higher up. And longer ripening often means they retain acidity better, and they have overall a more interesting nose because they develop more interesting flavors or the precursor for flavor over time. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, nailed it. Versus sort of say Valley Floor type fruit. Mm-hmm. Valley Floor fruit typically has an easier time, mm-hmm. right? You know, it's dealing more with sun exposure. It's getting the grapes are getting riper. They don't have to contend with that UV, so mm-hmm. The skins can be a little thinner. You get more of a voluptuous profile, usually fruitier, a little friendlier. I tend to think of the mountain fruits wines as tougher. They're usually more structured, muscular.
You don't want to run into them in an alley.
Yeah, exactly. And you need them. They need time, a little bit more time to soften up those tannins. Usually, especially with the reds, of course. Valley Floor fruit can be absolutely enthralling and delightful and lovely, mm-hmm. but it's usually more voluptuous, easier to get your head around at first. You can oftentimes open it a little earlier. Mm-hmm. Again, this is big generalization, right? Because certain sites will, as you get down to smaller and smaller areas of sourcing, you start to deal with very specific microclimates and mesoclimates, mm-hmm. and those tend to they can show differently, okay? So this is a very high level thing we're talking about here, a guideline. But generally speaking, the flatter that area and more valley areas, you're gonna get usually a fruitier presentation earlier, more mountainous a tougher, more tannic, more structured presentation earlier.
Yeah, you also get arguably a lot more grapes on the valley floor.
Yeah.
Because you've got generally you're dealing with alluvial soil. You're less likely to be dealing with rocks that are broken down and cracked to get the vine roots in. You're dealing with less water stress because it's easier to keep the water in one place when it's on a flat plain, as opposed to on the mountains where it's definitely going to run down. So you can tend to have a little bit more fruit. And then ultimately, after all these generalizations that we've made, the producer makes a big difference in how they handle it. Yeah. There's one or two maybe in Napa Valley that dry farm, which is to say they don't irrigate. And those wines come out different than almost everything else that's on the valley floor. So again, there's a broad generalizations, and sometimes the producers can prove us wrong.
Yeah. And one thing we should mention, production costs. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot easier to farm on flat land.
Yeah.
Right. And so the mountain stuff, a lot harder, steep. Sometimes you're dealing with really steep hills, things like that. You can't mechanize, etc. It's going to be typically a little more expensive.
Yep.
So what can we learn from the ABV or alcohol by volume usually on the back label, sometimes on the front, right, of a wine? Mm-hmm. Well, just like any alcoholic beverage, it tells you by volume how much alcohol is in there. Obviously, a higher number means there's more, right? So that's the first thing to understand. And I think the first consideration might be a health one in a way, because you are gonna, as a drinker, you'll know your own tolerance, and some people can tolerate higher alcohol beverages more than others. So if the number is higher, you may be the type of person who has to have a smaller glass, right? Or someone who prefers that. Now, from the standpoint of how that presents in the wine, typically speaking, a higher alcohol will feel richer and rounder in your mouth. So we talk about body, right, in wine, and it'll feel like a more fully bodied wine. It'll have generally a heavier presentation in your mouth. Having said that, balance is the key. You can have a great wine that has a pretty high alcohol content that feels almost effortless in your mouth because it's impeccably balanced with all the other aspects, fruit, acid, etc. You can have another that's lower alcohol that feels out of whack because it's not as well made.
Yeah. And on another note of what alcohol can tell you on a wine, sometimes it can give you a hint of where the wine's from. Generally, if you're in a place that's really warm and the grapes ripen really easily, well, they build up more sugar during the ripening process. And so that translates to everyone's favorite bit of chemistry, which is sugar plus yeast equals heat plus alcohol plus carbon dioxide. It's chemistry you can drink. So when you're in a really warm climate, you build up more sugar, you usually have more alcohol. So when you start getting high alcohol wines that are not chaptalized by having more sugar that's added to increase the alcohol, or they're not adding spirits to it to fortify the wine, well then you can say that something that's 15% usually is coming from a warm climate. Yeah. There's some exceptions. Amarone, for instance, is not fortified, but the grapes are dried, and even in the north of Italy, it routinely comes out between 16 and 18% alcohol. So that one is a bit of it's going to lead you by the nose in the wrong direction. But it's, generally, as a rule of thumb, the higher alcohol, the warmer the climate. Now, another consideration for alcohol is that when I'm tasting a lot of wines in sequence, I will usually start with the lowest alcohol or the lowest intensity of structure and then work my way up to higher. And there's a simple reason for wanting to do that, which is that the higher the alcohol is, even if I don't swallow it, I'm still exposing myself to alcohol. I'm still absorbing some of it, and that's going to make me just a little bit more silly, and we already know that I'm kind of a silly goose. So to keep everything on the straight and narrow, I start with lower alcohol, and I work my way up to the bigger stuff so that it only affects me later on after the shoot's over. And even so, I still spit as much as I can, just in case.
And from the alcohol level, I can tell you just from a personal anecdote here, if I've had kind of a crazy day, or my partner's had a crazy day, and she said, "Get a bottle of wine," now, I'm probably not going to pull out the 15-16% Amarone. Yeah. Right? She likes red. I'm probably going to look for a 13% red, because I know, based on what the day she's had, the bottle's not going to last. We're going to go together. We're going to go through it pretty quick. And so, it's just a litmus. I know our limits, and I don't want to come up with some big, heavy, boisterous wine if I know I'm going to potentially drink a lot of it.
Yeah.
Another thing is I think there's a situational aspect too. If you're having a really robust meal on a cold winter's night, right? The warming effect of a higher alcohol wine is very pleasant, and works in that entire scenario. If I just came in from yard work in the middle of August, right? I don't want a 15.5% red wine, right? I'm probably I'm good with the 10.5% Riesling.
Yeah.
Right. That's like super chilled. So I think, right. It's like, so I think the situational piece play for the average drinker, right? In the average scenarios, that plays a big part of it too.
It's why, like, if you're seeing like a commercial or something or a movie and someone's doing yard work and they get a glass of wine, it's a big glass of white with a bunch of ice cubes in it. And then when it's really cold, someone is sitting in front of a fire in an easy chair thinking about the ghosts of Christmas past, swirling a cognac, which is 40%. So, the colder it gets, the more we seek out pleasant warmth of alcohol. That might be way too broad. I don't know. We'll see. I just like the image of sitting in front of a fire with whiskey. And then if you're having a real bad day, you just like stand up and throw the whiskey into the fire and shout like, "Be gone, foul spirit!" What is the first period of time that we can remember where we recognize really falling in love with wine? Because if you make it your job, you kind of have to love it. And I can think of mine. I know mine. Mine is when I started to take wine more seriously, as less of like a pastime and less of just a way of bringing up the bill when I'm serving a table, but also just like something unique and special and interesting. So I was taking a class. It was with the International Sommelier Guild. It was level 1, and the teacher brought in a bottle of 1998 Chateau Lynchbage. It was a remarkable bottle of wine. I remember that the bottle actually had like a leaf and a stem in the bottom of the bottle. Like it still had like stuff in it. And the wine was so good. It smelled like manure. I know that's not a selling point, but it was such a unique note on the wine that was melding with the fruit really well and this animal and leather character. It was so unlike all of the cheaper wines I'd had at the time that it blew me away that wine could smell like this. And when you tasted it, the flavor never stopped changing. It never stopped building more notes to dive through. It was incredible. It was my favorite first wine that really set me on this path. It was great. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, so I remember having lobster. I was having a little bit of lobster. And a Chardonnay was served with this lobster. And I don't even remember what the Chardonnay was. It was nothing special, really. Just an average, everyday wine. And I took a bite of lobster and took a sip and was like, wait. Whoa. That's different. It tastes different. It's everything is like compounding like a wave, like the texture of both, the butteriness, everything. They all, some waves cancel out, some hit and build, and they all hit and built. And
we would refer to that in somm circles as a perfect pairing.
There you go. And I, and I kind of got like a goosebump reaction, and I thought, wait, what's going on? Like this isn't just about getting buzzed and things tasting good. There's more to this. So I started buying a few books and sort of getting into it, getting geeky, going off the deep end, and thinking, man, there's this chemistry, there's this gastronomy, there's this history, and the culmination of all of these different things became so utterly fascinating, that I couldn't get enough. I had to keep exploring. I went nerdy, like off the deep end. Similar, like we were like, wow, how can all this be coming from this one thing? I maybe came almost from another end where it was like, how could all of these things coalesce into this one thing? And that's the beauty of wine. All of that is true, right? And I think that was probably the first experience that got me got me going. And it's kind of you look back, it's almost miraculous now. I'm like friends with half the people that wrote those books, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
all the people that you were like picking their brains.
Right. The generosity and approachability of people who are experts in this space is unlike any other industry. I think it's really something special. And all of that stuff built on top of it, of each other, and there was no going back at that point.
Yeah. I also like what you said about the generosity of the people that are in this space, because there is a perception, and it's not entirely wrong, even though I wish it was, that wine is an aristocratic thing and that it is high society's thing, and it doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to the people who enjoy the finer things. But I think that wine should be going back to its roots of like existing on the dinner table as part of the meal. And I think that as we, as experts, like break it down more and understand it more and speak about it in ways that make it more colloquial and more accessible, we're breaking down this wall that's between the general consumer and wine, and making it less mysterious, less overpowering, and less something to overcome and something to explore, something to enjoy.
I mean, the fundamental purpose of a glass of wine is to give pleasure.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, any wall we build up around that dilutes that sense of wine's ultimate purpose.
Yeah.
And I think it's great that we can all geek out and do, and you can take it to any level of discourse that you want. But at the end of the day, it's about giving and receiving pleasure.
Yeah.
And I think we should never lose sight of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I was going to offer one bit of advice, it wouldn't necessarily be to the general public, because I hope that like these sessions have given you like the idea that lots of different things are worth exploring, and you should feel confident to go and try anything new, or just be settled in your taste. But for me, as a sommelier in the industry, I think that sommeliers have, while they're supposed to fulfill this role of bringing you wines that you might not be familiar with, I fear that in some cases we've been gatekeeping wines from people by building a mystique even around our position and making it difficult for people to feel like they can even talk to us. Like the best thing a sommelier can do is hold three values very close to themselves, which is patience, authenticity, and humility. If you can hold all those things together, you do a favor to the guest when you're tableside and you're just being genuine about what you like, and you're being patient with people who might not know as much as you, and you're being humble to recognize that like you are not a better person for being a sommelier, but you can be a very good person at recommending wine to someone else. There's a lot of room to be improving the sommelier community by trying to remember we're supposed to bring wine to people, not just seek out prestige by tasting good bottles. Good bottles.
Wow, I don't know how to follow this up. That was, I think for me, the advice I would give is similar to this one that I learned would always be open, always. Keep the childlike wonder. I mean, it helps in all aspects of life, especially in wine, because the topic is so deep and so broad and so malleable. It's changing all the time. You can have an assumption about a certain type of wine, a certain type of region, yada, yada, yada. And it could be different 3 years from now. The situation could be quite different, which is sometimes hard because it's hard to get your head around the complex topic like wine, but at the same time, it's super exciting. Yeah. And the most accomplished people that I've ever met in wine, these are the top of the line master somms and masters of wine, etc. They've all had this quality of, I've been on trips with people where they said, Joe, get over here. And I come running over, what's wrong? Dude, you gotta taste this.
Yes.
What is it? And they are immediately in the same headspace as me with this innocent wonder, this nerdy appreciation. There's no, the level of accomplishment between us is meaningless at that moment. We're just people with the shared passion.
Yeah, like you got to try this wine.
Yeah, and we feel so strongly about it, we want to share it.
Yeah.
Right? And so that that combination of openness and that humility of taking the craft seriously, but not yourself seriously, that's probably the best. Because people watching this, you probably already know more about wine than the average drinker, and you're going to learn more about wine than the average consumer. Don't get too full of yourself about it. I know that's part of it, but keep that openness, that wonder, that willingness to share. That's what makes this beverage so special to me.
Okay, what makes wine special? I think this is where I landed on this. I think that wine, when it's done really well, and someone really cares about it, it's one of the best blends of art and science that you can imbibe. There's so much that goes into it technically, and then there's also like such an art form of trusting your gut that it's at the right position and to let the wine be what it wants to be. And when you do that and you really care about it, you can see that in the wine. You can see that someone who made this really cared. So that's something that I like. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great kickoff, the answer to that question. I think first I'm going to agree with you in maybe in a slightly different way, and I'll add.
Sure.
So I think when it comes to wine, it's often industry. Sometimes it can be craft, and it very occasionally can be art. And that puts it in a very rarefied area with food, right? I think it's in terms of it can compete with the best gastronomical experiences, and I think that alone makes it quite special. There's few other things that can do that, right? I will say that it's among those things, it's even more special because it's when it hits craft and sometimes a level of art, it's one of the few things that can actually clue you into an exact place and time and expression as you the craft that you were describing.
Like it's like you're drinking a time capsule.
Yeah, exactly. And so when all of those things come together, that's pretty magical. So there are a few. Now we're talking about. When you have the right bottle of wine from a very specific place on earth, a very specific year, and it was made in such a great way. That's like getting an extremely special dish at a top restaurant, right? And all those things, it puts it in a very rarefied category to me. So I think, like you were saying, there's very few things that can connect us to place, time, and tension, in a visceral way like that. You're, like you said, drinking history.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been great. Keep these questions coming.
Oh yeah.
Because then we get to keep drinking.
And remember, the more you've got, write them down, send them in, get at us in the comments for the videos, and we will try to answer these at the next Q&A session. And with that, I'm going to steal yours, and I'm going to say, drink well, be well.